What's up, what's up, what's up? Apertures and open doors here in video 104. Today's video is called The Phoenix of Foresight. And so this is a direct continuation of last night's video dealing with xenoglossia and the comprehension of all tongues of men and angels. And this is a nice fun thing that we're going to learn, and it's the key to everything. But rather than get into, hundreds of thousands of years of ancient history to explain all this, let's just say hypothetically that the myth we have of the Tower of Babel alludes to some important information. Let's just say, I don't even want to say that anything in it is correct, but let's just look at this myth of Phineas Farseid, right? This guy supposedly lands in the British Isles, right? And he escaped the Tower of Babel. And so somehow he had the inheritance of this sacred, some would call it Adamic language, or there's all different ways of referring to it. But let's just say there's a vibrational code of speech that's innate to all human beings. And there's all kinds of different ways to explain that, but my goal here is to just give something super simple that everyone can relate to and understand. Okay, so let's just say hypothetically there's this Mantrayana, for real, powerful language, magic spells, right? And many of our modern languages, and especially the really old ones, are part of this casting power, right? So let's just start with basics, okay? How does sound work and how does speech work? Well, we have the larynx, which is like lyra. That's Orpheus' harp, right? That's the larynx. What's Orpheus? Okay, this word has a bunch of different meanings. One of them is black and hidden. And one of them, it relates to the word for orphan, right? But Orpheus is another just way of saying orifice, right? The black orifice out of which all sound emerges. This is called, Akasha Tattva in the Sanskrit system. The fifth element, as I was saying. So, in Babili priests, they wear this black cube on their forehead when they pray. You know what I mean? It's called tefillin. And so that relates to what I'm saying. So if you imagine that black cube as this vibrational substrate of ether, right? And your prayers are like entering into that cube to manifest into reality, theoretically, if you do it correct. And that's why I have Metatron, right? He ties it to our head. And he crowns all our letters and our prayers and perfects them and carries them to the highest heavens. So, this is all valuable shit to know. So we have this thing called the Phoenician Canaanites, right? Some say the Venetian black nobility is connected. But let's just say, for the sake of fun times and good stories, that there's a cult of pirates and sex traffickers and slavers that have been running the whole planet and keeping all the maps hidden and trying to segregate everyone out and running like Epstein-style ops everywhere, right? And so the Masons and the Templars are closely connected with this kind of a system. So this relates to the Phoenix. And this is a story, ancient story. This is where we get Kabbalah. It comes from Kybele, or Kubaba, this Anatolian mother goddess and her black cube, right? This is in the Masonic temples around the world to this day. And they're all, a lot of the high level ones, the Alpha Lodges, they have these ziggurats on top. And up on top of the ziggurat, in theory at least, symbolically, is this black stone, which some say was a meteorite that fell to Earth, right? So, imagine it like a coal. That's a really good way to think of it. Because if you think of a coal, like a hunk of coal, it's black, right? Pure carbon almost. Really high carbon content, right? But within that coal is a hidden flame. So out of darkness comes light, right? There's just so much symbolism about that. But I could do 10 hours easy on this whole topic, but let's just think about sound and how our voice works. We got the larynx, we got these resonant sinus cavities, and there's other apertures and cavities within the skull, and some of them are fluid filled. And then we have the trachea, which is kind of like this rigid, almost like a flute, goes down into the lungs, in the bronchi, right? So that whole thing is like a resonant chamber with our speech. And when you learn the science of Mantrayana for real, you learn about these vowel tones, right? And how the vowel tones resonate physiologically different places inside our body. And the science of the brain and the structure of the brain is so important to every kind of wizarding power. And it has to do with these cavities and these openings inside the skull and how to resonate them through our tones. So one of the main skeleton keys to the whole science of Mantrayana is this thing called the Kachari Mudra. And it's said that the Kachari is the land of where all the Dakinis and the powerful, emanations of our consciousness, that basically accomplish work for us through mystical means. I don't know, I kind of feel like the Dakinis might be some kind of time control technology, because they just set you up. Like you give your prayers and you do your devotions to them, and you build your force through a lunar ritual, like you build it to them, and they kind of go out and help you and set you up and put little coincidences and like bring you things you need, help you communicate with everybody, you know. But it's actually part of our own consciousness. That's the key thing to understand. So when you want to do this Kachari Mudra, you got to take the tip of your tongue, the tip of your sword, and touch it to what's called the uvula. It's at the top of the back, top of the palate. Most people can't do it right away. It takes quite a bit of practice. Some people actually have their tongue severed so that it goes back more completely. And in theory, at least, what I'm told in public books that I can talk about is that if you meditate with this pose, the Kachari Mudra, eventually you get this drip of called Amrit, right? The elixir of life and immortality. And even in Taoism, which was my first area of study, you know, into these areas, was like showing how they would do these things where you meditate and you keep that Kachari Mudra, and then you basically have this accumulation of saliva and fluids, and then you swallow it. And as you swallow it, you're visualizing these different light and energies absorbed into it and go into your different organ systems inside the body. And I mean, there's all kinds of other things to it besides that, but I'm just throwing that out there because it's highly related to what we're talking about. So in Sanskrit, a lot of these vowels, and in all the Tantra languages, you know, Banji script and Kotami and all these super old ancient Prakrits, right? Everything's about chanting. And so you have to intone these vowels and syllables in the powerful and correct way. And when you do so, you're resonating within the energy body all up and down the spine, okay? Because then you get into stuff of how the electrostatic flow of the breathing and the ferromagnetism of the blood mix in together and create this really cool like field coherency phenomenon. And sound, in a way, is a vibratory thing that like encodes into that matrix of our bioelectric field. So this is how the science of Mantrayana works, okay? And I mean, I have extensive training and I've studied all kinds of systems about this, but what I'm just gonna say is, if you are interested in what I'm saying, try just chanting different vowel tones, right? And most people don't know and understand all the vowel tones, or even what that is, because they never study language and grammar. But I'm just saying, you know, intone the vowels. E, you know, E, E, U, A, O. That's where we get Jawe and whatnot like that. Yahuwah. That's the vowel tones, right? Theoretically, a lot of people say there's 7 vowel tones, and this is what the Gnostics used in their barbarous tones, right? And they have all these books and texts of just amazingly long sequences of just vowel tones. Okay, I'm not going to get too into that, but I'm just going to say, if you chant these vowel tones and try to sustain them, and it's a way of pranayama and breath control and seeing how long you can sustain and like how many syllables you can pronounce before you have to take a breath, right? Because each one of these syllables is a charge of electrostatic force, and most importantly, our willpower and our imagination. Okay, and so in Tantra, what you do is you actually visualize these glowing letters spinning around, and that's what gives the deity their power. That's what charges you up, and it's what connects you to them, right? So you visualize the garland, right, or the what do they call it, the mala, right? You visualize it spinning, and it's different ways in different situations. Sometimes they face in, sometimes they face out. They spin different directions. So you visualize that. Okay. So, but what I'm saying is, if you just chant these vowel tones, you'll feel how they resonate in different areas of the body. And a lot of it's about the tongue and the placement of the tongue inside the mouth when you pronounce them, right? And so my point is that this is a key part of Tantra and all yoga. If you really are serious, this is how you're going to activate all aspects of your energy body. And this is how we do cast spells, okay? We have words and rhymes and rhythms, right? And the words themselves are just as important as your own mental concepts, you know? So you want to have a strong inner hologram of what it is that you're trying to produce, and you chant it and sing it into being at will. And you know, it doesn't have to be such a big production, you know? It can just be a simple phrase that you repeat to yourself. But if it rhymes and it's catchy and it's easy to remember, I'll just tell a story. So we're talking about xenoglossia last night, And so this is not necessarily like a thing where you just snap your fingers and get it. That can happen, okay? But just as much, it's a thing you train yourself in, right? So I'll give an example. I've been doing mantras for a really long time. I don't know how long, I even forgot. But basically, the more you do them, the more powerful they become, okay, for one thing. But let's just say I learned a sequence of prayers in an extremely foreign language with all different letters and words, and like it was, you know, most people that would be pretty hard, I think. And it was pretty difficult for me, but like I had the inclination and the commitment to do it, and it was fun and I enjoyed it. And what I noticed was I just started memorizing chunks of it, like without even trying. I would just repeat it over and over again, you know, slowly but surely, just like a kid that's learning to read. Like I would just read it over and over. And over the course of months, like, the first step is you just memorize it, right? Even though it's a foreign language, and one by one you might not even know the exact meaning of all the words, but you memorize it, right? And by chanting this, you're establishing this resonant bond with all the practitioners that have chanted this sequence of prayers, right? And especially we have lineage prayers, that some of them go back to these masters from over 1,000 years ago. And the theory is that by resonating with them, you entrain your mind with theirs, and with everyone that's performed these prayers. And so, but that's just phase one. Just the chanting and stuff, that's all phase one. You know, then you got mudras, how you move your hands and you do these different gestures and poses while you say it, and you visualize things and you do these different ritual actions, right? And the idea is that you're synchronizing your will with all the senses, body, speech, and mind, right? So this is how, you know, the science of words and magic works. So, you know, and it's deeply profound. And it has a lot to do with pranayama and breath control and circulating energy through the breath, like all throughout the body. And you know, you can also use this to phase train your brainwaves and enter into different states of consciousness, right? So this is just kind of introduction. So now next I'm going to tell you and get you to try and think about this process of enslavement and how the human race has been enslaved. And denying them the science that I'm telling you about is so critical to it. And that's why they erased all these old languages. And they tried to enslave all the priests. And they took over all the holy wells of the Druids and put Christian churches on top of them and took them over. Because the water is intimately related to this power of speech. You know, and then we could get into stuff like hydromancy, right? Where you take a container of water and you chant your mantras into it. And you visualize these different deities or energies or elemental forces or whatever you want, and you visualize it and you encode that into the water, okay? So let's just assume, just for the sake of argument, that this is a real thing and that there's people that have traditions of doing it that goes back many, many thousands of years. I don't believe that anyone at the current time has any even approximate estimate of how old these things can really be. You know what I mean? But let's just say they got the shit kind of dialed, right? And so they have control over the waters. Everyone needs access to the waters. The farmers, sick people, everyone needs some water, you know? So that's why the missionaries here where I live and all over California went and took over these spots by military force, and they started enslaving the natives, right? And so, you know, 100 years go by and they're still taking these natives and re-educating them and not allowing them to speak in their own languages and taking their names away. And so this is kind of the antithesis of the ritual we're trying to work with. So I'm showing you this dichotomy of how it should be, how it was, and how it is right now, and how it's all been flipped around. And so to me, this xenoglossia and the knowledge of tongues is a key to our liberation. And so that's why I'm trying to share it with everyone. I hope it works for you, and we'll get more later.